Hello, dear listener. I am grateful you are here with me today. Please subscribe so you can stay close for the next story and tell me in the comments which city or country you are listening from. It always touches my heart to see how far these moments reach. Enjoy the listen. In the quiet hours before sunrise, when the world still feels half asleep, a woman named Elena sat alone at the edge of a worn sofa in a dimly lit living room, wondering how life had brought her here. She held a single photograph in her hands, a picture of her younger self smiling wide with eyes full of hope, a woman who had once believed that love was enough to keep a family together, a woman who had not yet learned that sometimes life breaks you before it rebuilds you stronger. Elena traced her finger across the fading image and felt a sting rise behind her eyes. She had lost everything: her home, her marriage, her savings, her sense of direction. Yet the most painful loss of all was the belief that she had failed as a mother. She whispered to herself, not in words, but in breath, like a trembling prayer, "How do I begin again?" And the silence of the room answered her with nothing but the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing by on the empty street outside. Life had not always been this heavy. Once Elena had lived in a house where morning sunlight spilled freely through the windows and laughter drifted from room to room. She had believed in the promise of family and the beauty of nurturing something tender and fragile, but over time the cracks began to show, small at first like hairline fractures in glass, and then widening until everything she once held dear began to slip through her fingers. Her husband Mark had not always been an angry man, but somewhere along the way his dreams began to fade, and in their place grew frustration, resentment, and a quiet bitterness that clung to him like a shadow. It started with small remarks, little criticisms spoken under the guise of concern, and before long those remarks became sharp words that cut deeper than he ever seemed to notice. Elena tried to hold everything together. She tried to soften the edges of his moods, to carry the weight of the household, to keep peace for the sake of their son Noah. But love alone could not heal a man who did not want to be healed. One winter night, everything changed. The argument had begun over something small, a bill, a forgotten task, something so insignificant that Elena could not even remember what it was. But what she did remember was the look in Mark's eyes, a look she had never seen before, one of cold detachment, as though he no longer saw her as the woman he once promised to honor and cherish, but as an inconvenience standing in the way of his anger. The shouting grew louder, harsh words filled the air, the kind that once spoken echo in the mind long after the sound fades. Noah stood at the top of the stairs, clutching the railing, his small face pale with fear. Elena felt something break inside her that night, a deep, fragile part of her that had stayed strong for far too long. She took Noah into her arms and held him close, whispering that everything would be all right, even though she had no idea how or when that would ever be true. She knew then that she had to leave, not for herself, but for the little boy who deserved a childhood free from fear. The weeks that followed were a blur. She found a small temporary apartment with peeling wallpaper and creaking floors. She worked long hours, piecing together two part-time jobs, while trying to keep Noah's world as stable as possible. She had no support, no family nearby, no savings left. Her dreams of building a peaceful life felt impossibly far away. Yet every morning, she woke before dawn, made breakfast for Noah, packed her own small bag, and carried on, because giving up was not an option for a mother who still believed in the possibility of better days. But even with all her effort, life kept testing her. She fell behind on rent, her old car broke down, leaving her stranded on her way to work, and no matter how hard she tried, the weight of everything seemed too heavy to fight. One evening, as she tucked Noah into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes and said, "Mom, when will things feel normal again?" His words pierced her heart like a quiet plea she could not ignore. Elena kissed his forehead and whispered, "Soon, my love, soon," even though she had no idea when that day would come. After he drifted into sleep, she sat alone in the corner of their tiny flat, listening to the rain tapping softly against the window. She felt the loneliness settle around her like a heavy blanket. She wondered if she was failing her son, if she was strong enough, if she was enough at all. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to cry, not the silent, restrained tears she had grown used to, but deep, aching sobs that came from a place she had kept hidden for far too long. Her tears were a release, a surrender, a quiet acknowledgement that she was human and exhausted, and trying so desperately to hold herself together in a world that kept trying to pull her apart. But fate often speaks in whispers, not in grand gestures, and in the quiet moments that follow despair, a new path begins to reveal itself. One night, as Elena worked late at a small cafe cleaning tables and stacking chairs, after closing, a woman walked in drenched from the rain. She apologized for coming in so late and asked if she could wait inside until the storm passed. Her name was Sarah. She was warm and gentle with eyes that seemed to understand more than she spoke. Elena made her a cup of tea and the two began to talk, not deeply at first, just small talk about the weather, the cafe, the city, but then the conversation slowly unfolded like a flower opening its petals. Sarah told her she had once been in a difficult marriage too. She had once felt lost, overwhelmed and broken, yet she had rebuilt her life piece by piece, and now she worked with a local community organization helping women find support, resources, and a safe path to rebuilding their lives. She looked at Elena with a softness that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds and said, "You are stronger than you realize, and you do not have to do this alone." Those words lingered in Elena's mind long after Sarah left. They settled into her heart like a seed waiting for the right moment to grow. She had spent so long believing she needed to endure everything on her own that the idea of asking for help felt unfamiliar, almost frightening, but she felt something shift inside her, a small glimmer of hope, a quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to rise from the ashes of everything she had lost. She met Sarah again a week later, this time at the community center, where she was introduced to other women who had walked similar paths. Each one carried her own story, her own scars, her own battle, yet each one also carried strength, resilience, and a spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. These women did not judge, they did not question, they simply understood, as if they saw in Elena the same fire they had once discovered within themselves. Slowly, Elena began to rebuild a foundation, not of material things, not of stability or success, but of inner strength. She attended workshops and counseling sessions. She learned about her rights. She discovered avenues of support she had never known existed. She found a group of women who believed in her at a time when she struggled to believe in herself. She learned how to quiet the voice inside her that whispered she was not enough and replaced it with a new voice, one that told her she was worthy. She was capable, she was strong. She watched as Noah slowly began to laugh again, real laughter, the kind that comes from a child who finally feels safe. She found herself taking deeper breaths, sleeping a little better, smiling a little more often. She began to see that the life she once lost was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new one. Yet, even in this slow rising journey, there were still days of doubt, days when the shadows of the past reached for her, days when she questioned every step forward. But now she was not facing those shadows alone, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, as she walked home from a support meeting, she paused in front of a small park where mothers sat on benches watching their children play. She saw a group of little boys running joyfully across the grass, and among them she spotted Noah, his laughter echoing above the sound of the wind. Something inside her softened at that moment, a realization, a truth settling in her heart. She had not failed him after all. She had saved him. She had saved them both. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting warm golden hues across the park, Elena felt a shift, a quiet strength awakening within her. She realized that the past no longer defined her. She was not the woman who lost everything. She was the woman who survived the storm and was still standing. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the setting sun wash over her, and in that gentle moment, she whispered to herself, "I am beginning again." This was the birth of her new story, and though she could not yet see how far she would rise, she felt something she had not felt in a long time, a sense of possibility. The first real turning point in Elena's new life arrived quietly on a morning that began like any other. She woke before dawn, the small apartment still wrapped in silence, Noah still curled beneath his blanket dreaming in soft breaths. She made tea and stood by the window, holding the warm cup between her palms as the early sky shifted slowly from dark blue to pale gold. She had grown used to mornings like this, gentle, calm moments before the rush of the day, but something felt different that morning. She felt a restlessness inside her, a stirring as though life was whispering to her that change was drawing near. She walked Noah to school, the crisp air brushing against her cheeks, and watched him run through the gates with his backpack bouncing behind him. He waved once before disappearing into the crowd of children. Elena felt pride warm her chest, small and fragile, but real. She had brought Him here, she had kept going even when everything around her tried to pull her under. She walked slowly toward the cafe where she worked, but halfway there she paused, her steps growing still as a thought rose inside her. One that had been forming quietly for weeks. What if she dared to dream again, not for survival, not for getting through each day, but for herself? She had forgotten what it felt like to imagine a future beyond struggle, but now as she stood on the pavement watching the world move around her, the idea felt possible. When she reached the cafe, she tied her apron around her waist and began the morning routine, arranging pastries, wiping counters, filling the air with the scent of fresh coffee. Customers began to flow in one by one, the familiar rhythm of daily life, weaving through the small space. But around mid-morning, Sarah walked in, her smile warm as always. She looked at Elena with an expression of quiet excitement and said, "I have something to show you." She handed Elena a small brochure, its cover decorated with a simple design and words that made Elena's breath catch in her chest: adult education and career workshops. Elena looked up at Sarah, uncertain, fear flickering behind her eyes. Sarah stepped closer, her voice gentle and steady, and said, "You have so much potential, Elena, but you have spent so long surviving that you forgot who you can be. I think it is time you remember." Their eyes held a moment of stillness, a moment that felt like standing at the edge of a bridge, unsure whether the leap would break you or set you free. Elena felt her throat tighten. She whispered, "I do not know if I can." Sarah answered softly, "You do not have to know, you simply have to begin." Those words followed Elena through the rest of her shift like a steady echo. When she walked home that evening, Noah skipping beside her, she felt the weight of the brochure in her bag as though it held a new version of her life, waiting silently to be chosen. After dinner, when Noah settled into bed, she sat alone at the small kitchen table, the room dim except for the soft glow of a lamp. She opened the brochure, reading each line carefully. The courses offered job readiness training, financial management, emotional support programs, and even scholarships for those rebuilding after domestic hardship. Her heart pounded with each page. She felt both fear and hope pulling at her in equal measure. She had learned how to endure pain, but she had not yet learned how to build a future. She whispered to herself, "Can I really do this?" And in the quiet room, she imagined Sarah answering yes. The next day, she signed up for an introductory workshop, her hands trembling slightly as she filled out the form. When she walked into the community center, she felt like an outsider, like someone who did not quite belong. But the moment she stepped into the classroom, she saw women of all ages sitting in chairs arranged in a circle, some smiling nervously, some avoiding eye contact, all carrying invisible stories in their eyes, stories etched by struggle, by loss, by resilience. They greeted Elena with warm nods as she took a seat, and for the first time in a long while she felt she was among people who understood her without needing words. The workshop leader, a calm woman with silver streaks in her dark hair, began speaking about rebuilding confidence, about rediscovering one's identity after hardship, about learning to believe again in the possibility of growth. Elena listened, every word sinking into her like rain falling on dry earth. She felt something in her soften, something open, a realization that she had spent so long trying to protect herself that she had forgotten how to let anything new into her life. At the end of the session, the leader looked at the group and said, "Healing is not about forgetting what happened to you, it is about choosing what happens next." Elena breathed deeply, letting those words settle in her heart. As weeks passed, Elena continued attending the workshops. She learned things she had never been taught before: how to write a professional CV, how to prepare for interviews, how to handle finances, how to build a stable foundation. She discovered parts of herself she thought were lost. She was curious, eager, willing to learn. Her instructors often told her she had a natural intelligence, a quiet determination that made her stand out. She felt small sparks of pride flicker within her, pride she had not felt in years. Sometimes she would catch herself smiling without realizing, and each smile felt like another piece of her returning home. But growth does not come without challenge, and one afternoon while walking home, she received a letter from her old landlord. The apartment she had run from, the one she had lived in with Mark, the one filled with memories, both beautiful and painful. The letter stated she still owed outstanding charges, debts she had not been aware of, and the sum was far more than she could afford. She felt the air leave her lungs. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, the letter trembling in her hands. She had been building so carefully, stitching her life back together thread by fragile thread, and now this new weight threatened to unravel everything. She returned home, trying to stay calm for Noah, but inside her old fears resurfaced: the fear of never escaping the past, the fear of drowning again in a life she fought so hard to leave. That night after Noah fell asleep, she sat in the living room, light pouring from the soft lamp, casting shadows across the worn carpet. Her hands rested on her knees, her chest tight with worry. She felt like crying, but no tears came, only a quiet numbness. Then she remembered Sarah. She hesitated for a moment before sending her a message explaining what had happened. Within minutes, Sarah replied, "Come to the center tomorrow morning. We will figure this out together." Elena read the message 3 times, letting the reassurance sink in. Someone was there for her. Someone would stand beside her in this new storm. For years, she had believed she had to face everything alone, but tomorrow she would walk into a room where she no longer had to carry the weight by herself. The next morning, she brought the letter to the center. Sarah read it carefully, her brow furrowing in concern, but instead of panic, she spoke calmly, outlining steps Elena could take, negotiating options, legal guidance, support plans. They spent the next hour making phone calls, reviewing documents, speaking to advisors, people who specialized in helping women rebuild their lives. By the end of the meeting, the weight in Elena's chest felt lighter, not gone, but shared, carried together by hands willing to help her. She felt a deep gratitude overwhelm her, a relief that almost made her knees weaken. If she had received this letter a year earlier, she would have been crushed, but now she was no longer the same woman who once felt helpless in the face of every hardship. She was learning, she was rising, she was becoming. Later that day, as she walked home, she felt something she had not felt in a long time, a steady, quiet strength. She had faced a challenge without falling apart. She had found solutions. Instead of surrender, she realized that resilience was not the absence of fear, but the courage to move through fear, even when your voice trembles, even when your knees shake. She whispered to herself, "I am doing this. I am really doing this." Her progress at the community center did not go unnoticed. One of her instructors approached her after a workshop and said, "Have you ever considered training in social care or counseling? You have a gift for understanding others and guiding them. You could help so many women who walk the same road you have walked." Elena felt stunned. The idea seemed so large, so impossible, yet also so right. She felt a warm flutter in her chest, a sense that perhaps her pain had a purpose, perhaps everything she had endured was shaping her into someone who could bring light into the lives of others. She did not answer right away, but the seed was planted silently, opening its first small leaf inside her heart. One weekend, she took Noah to the library for a community reading event. She watched him sit cross-legged on the colorful carpet, listening intently to the storyteller, his small eyes shining with wonder. She looked around at the other parents, families, laughing children playing, the sunlight pouring through tall windows. She felt a longing, a wish to give Noah a stable life full of warmth and opportunity, a life far from fear, far from chaos, far from the shadows of her past. She gently touched the ends of his hair and whispered, "I promise, I will build something better for you." He looked up at her and smiled, the purest smile, and in that moment she felt an unshakable resolve. She would give him a life brighter than anything they had lost. As months passed, Elena grew more confident. She applied for a scholarship program designed for women restarting their education. After hardship, she prepared her documents. With trembling hands, wrote her personal statement, with tears slipping down her cheeks, then submitted her application. With a deep breath, she told herself that whatever happened, she had already won. She had already risen far beyond the woman who once felt trapped with no way out, but part of her hoped, deeply hoped, that this chance might open a new door. One afternoon, while washing dishes, her phone buzzed. She wiped her hands quickly and picked it up, her breath catching, as she read the email. "Congratulations, your scholarship has been approved. You have been accepted into the training program for social support and advocacy." Elena covered her mouth with her hands, tears flooding her eyes, her body shaking with a mix of disbelief and overwhelming joy. Noah ran into the room asking, "Mom, what happened?" And she knelt down, pulled him into her arms, and whispered, "We are going to be all right, my love. We are going to be more than all right." That night after Noah fell asleep, she sat by the window once more, but this time the stillness felt different. It was full of possibility, full of beginnings, full of quiet triumph. She thought about the woman she once was, sitting alone on a worn sofa, believing she had lost everything, believing she was broken beyond repair. She wished she could reach back in time, wrap her arms around that woman, and whisper, "You will rise, you will heal, you will become someone you never imagined you could be." She looked at the city lights flickering in the distance and felt a fire within her, not loud, not fierce, but steady, a flame that had survived storms and now glowed with quiet determination. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." The first day of the training program arrived quietly, yet inside Elena a storm of emotions swirled, both excitement and fear. She stood in front of the mirror early that morning, smoothing the sleeves of the simple blouse she had chosen, her hands trembling, ashes of her own life. She took a deep breath, whispered to herself, "I can do this," and stepped out the door. On the bus ride to the center, she stared out the window, watching the city pass in soft blurs, tall buildings, gray sidewalks, people rushing to work, each moment feeling like a step into a future she had not been brave enough to imagine a year ago. When she reached the center, her heart pounded. She hesitated at the entrance, her pulse quickening, but then she remembered Noah's smile, the warmth in Sarah's eyes, the way her instructors had believed in her. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked inside, determined to give this new chapter everything within her. The classroom buzzed with quiet conversation as other women settled into their seats, some smiling nervously, some flipping through notebooks, some whispering softly to one another. Elena found a seat near the window, where soft light gently touched the desks. The instructor, a kind woman with gentle eyes, welcomed everyone, her voice warm as she spoke about the importance of compassion, empathy, and resilience in the work they were beginning. She said, "You are here not because of where you have been, but because of who you are becoming." And those words wrapped around Elena like a warm embrace. She felt her fear begin to loosen, replaced slowly by purpose. The lessons were intense, the coursework challenging. Elena spent long hours reading, writing, taking notes, practicing communication skills, learning how to support women in crisis, learning how to guide them towards safety and hope. She discovered that every experience she had endured gave her a perspective that could not be taught in any classroom. Her pain had become wisdom, her struggle had become strength, her scars had become maps, leading her to understand others in a way few could. She did not simply learn, she connected, she listened deeply, she empathized without judgment. She grew. Each day after class, Elena would pick up Noah from school. He would run into her arms, chattering excitedly about his day. They walked home together, sharing laughter and stories. The streets felt different now, brighter somehow, as if hope had touched every corner of her world. One evening as they walked, Noah looked up at her and said, "Mum, you seem happier." Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest. She knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and answered softly, "I am, my love, I really am." And he wrapped his small arms around her neck with the innocence of a child who still believed love could solve anything. And for a moment she felt the truth of it. Love was why she had survived. Love was why she had risen. Love was why she kept moving forward. Weeks turned into months, and Elena's confidence grew. She built friendships with the other women in her program, friendships rooted in shared understanding, each one carrying their own story of loss and survival. Together, they formed a quiet sisterhood, supporting one another, celebrating small victories, lifting each other on days when past memories weighed too heavily. Elena found comfort in their presence, in their resilience, in the beauty of women rising from different storms toward the same sun. Her heart expanded with gratitude, knowing she was no longer alone in her journey. But life, even when it is changing for the better, still carries shadows of the past. One afternoon, while Elena and Noah were walking through a crowded market, she suddenly heard a familiar voice calling her name. Her body froze, her breath caught in her chest. She turned and saw Mark standing a few steps away, his expression unreadable. For a moment the noise of the world faded, everything around her becoming still. Noah gripped her hand tightly, sensing her fear. Elena steadied her breath. She felt the old memories rush through her, memories of shouting nights, heavy silence. Fear knotted in her stomach, but she reminded herself she was no longer that woman. She was not the woman who trembled under the weight of his anger. She was not the woman who felt trapped. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone rebuilding a life from nothing. Mark stepped closer, his eyes scanning her with a mix of surprise and something she could not name. He said, "You look different." Elena could not tell if he meant it as a compliment or an accusation. She simply stood tall, her voice steady as she answered, "I am different." He looked around as if searching for something to say, then he muttered, "I don't understand why you left." Everything was fine. Elena felt a cold heaviness settle in her chest, the familiar twisting of old guilt trying to resurface, but she pushed it back. She looked him in the eye and spoke with quiet strength, "It was not fine for me, and it was not fine for our child." She felt Noah lean against her side and placed a protective hand on his back. Mark's expression flickered, as if he wanted to argue, but something in her eyes held him back. After a tense moment, he exhaled sharply, shook his head, and stepped away, disappearing into the crowd. As he walked off, Elena felt her legs wobble slightly, but she did not fall. She stood firm, breathing deeply. She looked down at Noah, who gazed at her with wide eyes, and she said softly, "It's all right, darling, everything is all right." And in that moment, she realized how far she had come. She had faced the past without shrinking, without apologizing, without fear. She had faced the man who once held power over her and discovered he no longer did. She walked home with a quiet pride settling in her heart. The encounter had not broken her, it had proven her strength. The following day, she told Sarah about the incident. Sarah listened closely, her expression thoughtful, then said, "Elena, sometimes the past returns not to break you, but to show you how strong you have become, and you have become extraordinary." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition of her own transformation. She had worked so hard to rise, she had fought so fiercely to heal, and now she could finally see that she was no longer defined by the pain she once carried. As her training program continued, Elena excelled. Her instructors praised her insight, compassion, and natural ability to guide others. She completed practical training sessions meeting women who came from different backgrounds, each one searching for support and understanding. Elena listened with patience, offering calm, steady reassurance. She never pretended to have all the answers, but she offered something far more valuable: presence, empathy, and the deep knowing that survival was possible. She became someone others could trust, someone who understood, someone who had walked the same dark roads and found her way back to the light. Near the end of the program, Elena received an opportunity that took her breath away. The community center offered her an internship assisting with crisis support services, a role that would allow her to apply everything she had learned to help women in real time. She accepted the position with both excitement and nervousness, knowing the responsibility was immense, but also knowing she was ready. Her first day was overwhelming, the phone ringing constantly, women arriving seeking help, stories filled with pain, fear, loss. But each time Elena sat with them, she felt her purpose deepen. She understood their fear, she recognized their exhaustion, she knew how hard it was to walk through the door and ask for help. She offered kindness, empathy, patience, and hope. She became a steady presence, a warm voice, a guiding hand. One evening after a long day, she walked out of the center, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Sarah stepped beside her, smiling warmly, and said, "You were made for this work." Elena felt her heart swell with quiet joy. She looked at the sky, breathing in the cool evening air, and whispered, "I think I was." Sarah nodded gently. Sometimes the world breaks us open just enough to let the light in, so we can share it with others. Elena felt tears touch her lashes, but they were gentle tears, healing tears. Tears of a woman who finally understood her purpose. As she walked home through the fading light, her footsteps slow and steady, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, the long, painful nights, the moments of doubt, the fear that she would never find her way, and she realized that every step had led her to this moment, a moment where she could say with certainty that she had rebuilt her life from nothing. She had become someone she was proud to be, someone who had pulled herself from the depths of despair and risen into strength. When she reached her apartment, Noah opened the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. He hugged her tightly, chattering about his day, and she listened, smiling softly. She held him close, inhaling the familiar scent of his hair, and whispered, "You and I, my love, we made it further than I ever imagined." Noah looked up at her, eyes shining, and said, "Because you are the strongest person I know, Mom." Elena felt her heart melt, her eyes blur with emotion, and she realized that everything she had fought for, every tear, every sleepless night, every painful step, had led her to this beautiful truth. She was strong, she was capable, she was enough. That night, after Noah fell asleep, she sat by the window once again, the city lights flickering softly below. She closed her eyes, letting the calm night air fill her lungs. She thought about the woman she had become, and felt a deep peace settle inside her. She had not simply rebuilt her life, she had rebuilt herself from the ground up, stronger, wiser, softer, braver. She whispered into the quiet room, "I did not just survive, I rose." Her journey was not ending, it was only beginning, and she knew that whatever came next, she was ready. She rose before the dawn again that next morning, the chill of the early air brushing against her skin, as if reminding her that life was no longer the same path she once walked. She stepped into the narrow, quiet street with a quiet resolve settling in her bones. She knew now that progress was not a staircase, it was a battlefield. Each step fought for, each breath earned, each emotion acknowledged rather than avoided. She had rebuilt pieces of her world, but grief had a strange way of revisiting, like a tide that refused to obey any human command, yet she kept moving, she kept choosing one more step, one more chance, one more moment. She walked past the corner shop, where a single mother worked long hours to feed her son, and for a second Maria felt a sense of kinship, as if all the broken mothers in the world carried a shared heartbeat, an invisible ribbon binding them together. She breathed in the cool air and felt it steady her hands. She was ready for another day at the shelter, ready to pour strength into others, even while she secretly stitched her own. When she reached the shelter, the halls already carried the restless hum of morning life, voices, low footsteps, quick whispers tucked into corners. She greeted them with a warmth that came from the quiet fury of someone who knew what it felt like to lose everything and still rise. Again, she found an elderly woman sitting alone, hunched shoulders pulled tight, as if carrying stones. Maria knelt beside her, and her voice softened like water across glass. She asked, "What weighs on you today?" And slowly the woman opened her story piece by trembling piece, a story of loss, of abandonment, of feeling invisible in a world that moved too fast. Maria listened, not with the ears, but with the depth of someone who knew that silence often spoke louder than any cry. After the woman finished, she placed her hand gently over hers, a soft promise passing between them without language. "You are not alone, you are seen, you are held." She left the room lighter, as if a single moment of connection restored something inside her chest. A place that had once felt permanently dark now flickered with living light. The day continued like a long, slow river, carrying moments of pain and moments of small, unexpected healing. There was a young girl who had run from home, shaking with fear. Maria guided her through, breathing, grounding her with steady words. There was a man who had lost his family in an accident and came seeking a single hour where his grief could breathe. Without judgment, Maria offered him a quiet space and the kind of presence that held without suffocating. She became a mirror for their strength, reflecting back what they believed they had lost. By the afternoon sun, the sky turned pale with winter light, the kind that slips across the world like a shy whisper. Maria sat in the tiny office sorting paperwork. When she came across an old photograph of her daughter, she found herself staring at it, the kind of stare that reaches so deep into memory that time seems to fold. She traced the shape of her daughter's face with her thumb, and for a moment her heart ached like it did in the earliest days of loss, raw, heavy, unforgiving. But this time, something new rose behind it, something steady, something warm. Acceptance, not the kind that erases the pain, but the kind that agrees to live beside it without fear. She placed the photograph carefully in her pocket and stood taller than before. When she stepped out of the shelter, the sky had shifted into evening hues, soft shades drifting together like a painting learning how to heal. She walked slowly through the quiet streets, her mind replaying fragments of her journey, the nights she could not sleep, the mornings she wished would not come, the days she thought she would never rise again, and yet she had risen again, and she was rising still. She reached a small cafe on the corner, the one she used to avoid, because families would gather there laughing, sharing moments she thought she had lost forever. But today she stepped inside, the soft bell over the door chiming lightly as if welcoming a new chapter. She ordered tea and sat by the window watching life move outside in rhythms she no longer envied but understood. She watched a father lift his daughter into his arms, her laughter ringing through the cool air without stirring grief in her chest. Instead, it stirred something like gratitude, like recognition that love still existed in the world, even if hers looked different now. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet contentment of the moment. She realized she was no longer clinging to survival. She was slowly learning to live again, not as the woman she once was, but as the woman she had become. Shaped by storms, softened by pain, strengthened by grace, she was not a chapter, she was a whole book still being written. As she finished her tea, she glanced at her phone, a message glowing on the screen from the shelter director, reminding her of a new mentoring program launching soon, a program for women, rebuilding their lives from the ground up. They wanted her to lead it. She stared at the message, feeling an unexpected swell of emotion, a mixture of disbelief, pride, and the quiet hum of purpose finding her once again. She had gone from standing in the ruins of her life to becoming a foundation for others. She stepped outside into the evening air, stars beginning to shimmer softly overhead. The night carried a gentle wind lifting strands of her hair, like it was encouraging her forward. She walked back home, slowly, steadily, each footstep aligning with the rhythm of her breath. She thought of the women she would guide, the stories she would hold, the lives she might help transform, and she realized she was ready, truly ready for all of it. When she reached her door, she paused, hand resting on the frame as a quiet thought touched her heart like a soft flame. She had lost everything once, but what she was building now was something she never could have imagined, not the life she expected, but the life she deserved, a life shaped by courage and tempered by sorrow, but brightened by compassion. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, feeling the warmth of her small home settle around her like a gentle embrace. And for the first time in a very long time, she whispered a promise to herself, a vow woven gently into the quiet of her heart. Tomorrow I rise again. The morning light filtered through her curtains with a softness that felt almost like a blessing, as if the universe itself had decided to lay a gentle hand on her shoulder, urging her into this new chapter of her life. She lay still for a moment, letting the warmth brush across her face, feeling a peace she once thought she would never recognize again. This peace did not erase the past, but it held it with tenderness, honoring it without letting it control her. She rose slowly and stepped barefoot onto the cool floor, her heart steady, her breath unhurried as she prepared for the day ahead. She moved through her small home with quiet intention, placing her daughter's photograph on the table beside her tea, letting the steam rise between them like a silent conversation. She whispered a soft good morning to the memory of the girl she loved more than breath itself, and today that love no longer felt like a chain, but like a lantern glowing inside her, guiding her through the world with gentle, unwavering light. When she reached the shelter, the morning sun had begun to paint warm strokes across the old brick walls, and she felt something stir beneath her ribs, a sense of purpose humming low and strong like a drumbeat. She had once believed her life was over, but now she knew she was stepping into the greatest work she would ever do. The mentoring program began in a small room lined with chairs arranged in a gentle circle, each one waiting for a new story, a new wound, a new beginning. She stood in the center of the room, letting the moment settle around her, breathing in the sacredness of it. One by one the women began to arrive, each carrying invisible worlds inside them, worlds built from shattered trust and whispered fear, worlds that weighed heavily on their shoulders yet somehow had not broken them. She watched them take their seats, eyes tired, voices quiet, hands folded as if holding themselves together. She recognized all of it because she had lived it too. She stepped forward, her voice soft but sure enough to fill the room with a kind of warmth that made fear loosen its grip. She told them she was not here to fix them, she was here to walk beside them. She was here to remind them of the strength hiding beneath their scars. She watched their eyes soften one by one, as if someone had finally understood. Without demanding explanations, the session unfolded slowly, gently, like a fragile bloom finding the courage to open. She invited each woman to share as much or as little as she wished, and as their voices trembled, their truths spilled into the room, weaving a tapestry of courage that stretched from wall to wall. There was a woman who had escaped a violent home, clutching her baby in the darkest hour of the night. There was another who had been left alone after her husband abandoned her without a word. Another who had lost her home, her savings, her sense of identity, and had been sleeping in her car before arriving at the shelter. Each story cut through the room like a quiet storm, but beneath every word Maria heard something deeper than pain. She heard survival, she heard bravery, she heard the faint but steady pulse of hope. When it was her turn to speak, she did not hide her story, she did not soften the edges, she let them see the truth of her losses, the shattered world she had crawled through, the nights she had thought her heart would never heal. She spoke gently, but with a fierce honesty that made the air shift around them. She told them she was living proof that a life could be rebuilt piece by piece, with hands shaking, with nights full of silent tears and mornings filled with doubt. She told them healing was not a straight line, it was a winding road of small victories and quiet resilience. By the end of the session, the room carried a warmth that felt almost sacred. The women looked at one another not with judgment, but with recognition. They shared a soft, unspoken promise that they would rise together. She watched them leave the room with steps just a little steadier than when they arrived, and she felt a quiet pride blooming beneath her heart, like a flower opening to sunlight for the first time after a long winter. As she gathered the papers from the table, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and saw a message from a publishing house offering her the opportunity to write a memoir, a story of loss, survival, and rebuilding, a story that might guide others through their darkest moments. Her breath caught in her throat not from fear, but from gratitude. She had once believed her voice was buried beneath the rubble of her life, but now it was being asked to rise and be heard. She stepped outside the shelter, the sky washed in a soft evening gold, the air filled with the gentle hum of life unfolding around her. She walked slowly, letting the world settle into her senses, the laughter of children in the distance, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, each sound a reminder that life continued, life moved, life healed. She paused on the steps and let the sunlight warm her shoulders, feeling her daughter's presence like a soft whisper in the wind beside her, not gone, only changed. She walked towards the park where she used to take her daughter, the place she avoided for years because the memories were too heavy, but today she felt a tug inside her urging her to return. She entered the park slowly, each step a quiet prayer. She sat on the old bench beneath the tall oak tree where she used to watch her daughter run across the grass, carefree, glowing, alive. She closed her eyes and let the memory unfold, letting it wash over her, not with agony, but with gratitude. She opened her eyes to see a little girl chasing a butterfly, her laughter echoing across the field, and instead of pain, Maria felt warmth blooming, a reminder that life still held beauty, life still held innocence, life still held moments worth staying for. She watched until the girl ran back to her mother, and something inside Maria settled gently like a bird coming home to rest. As the sun dipped lower, the sky turning shades of rose and amber, she felt a quiet certainty rise within her. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes. She had grown roots in places she once feared to stand. She had learned that healing was not the absence of pain, but the ability to carry pain with grace. She stood from the bench, the soft wind brushing her hair like a blessing. She whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, to her past, to everything that had broken her, and everything that had saved her. She walked home with steady steps, her heart no longer heavy, but open, ready for the stories she would write, ready for the lives she would lift, ready for the chapters that waited just beyond the horizon. She unlocked her door, stepped inside, and felt the warmth of her home greet her like an embrace. She stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet settle around her before whispering a promise to the life she had built, a promise woven into the stillness like a gentle vow. Tomorrow I rise again, stronger than before. The morning rose with a pale golden hush stretching itself gently across her room, as if the light had learned her softness and mirrored it back to her. She lay still for a moment, letting the quiet enter her chest like a slow warm tide. She no longer woke with heaviness. She no longer carried the weight of yesterday on her spine. Instead, she carried something lighter, something steadier, a quiet confidence born from surviving everything she once thought would break her. She stepped into the small kitchen and set the kettle to boil, listening to the soft, familiar hum of the water warming. She moved with a grace that came from years of relearning how to live. She placed her notebook on the table, the same notebook she had begun writing in when she first returned to the shelter, a notebook filled with thoughts, reflections, and broken pieces she never expected to weave into anything meaningful. Now those same fragments had caught the attention of a publisher. Her story, once hidden inside her bones, was slowly preparing to step into the world. Her tea warmed her hands, and she sat in silence, knowing that today would shape her life in ways she never imagined. She was meeting with the publishing house. She was meeting with the director of the mentoring program. She was stepping into a future she rebuilt from dust and tears and fierce, quiet determination. She breathed in deeply, letting the moment settle inside her like a promise whispered into her heart. When she left her home, she walked with a calm, steady stride, the morning air cool against her skin, the streets humming gently with early life, people rushing, bicycles ringing, distant conversations threading through the air. She no longer felt lost in the world, she felt present, rooted, part of the rhythm she once feared she would never rejoin. She reached the bus stop and waited, watching the sunlight shift across the pavement in soft, warm strokes. As the bus arrived, she stepped inside, the familiar engine hum settling beneath her. She watched the city through the window, buildings rising like guardians, streets curving like memories, people moving like threads, weaving together the fabric of a life that continued no matter how many hearts cracked within it. She saw herself reflected faintly in the glass, not the woman she once was, not the woman shattered by loss, but the woman rebuilt by resilience, softened by compassion, strengthened by purpose. She reached the publishing office, a tall, clean building with glass windows catching the sunlight like polished mirrors inside. She was welcomed, warmly guided into a small, bright room lined with books, stories of people who had endured, fought, risen, lived. She felt a flutter inside her chest, but not fear, something closer to gratitude. The editor sat across from her, speaking with a calm, steady kindness, telling her how powerful her story was, how many people it could touch, how many hearts it might heal. She listened quietly, letting the words settle over her like gentle rain. They spoke of chapters and timelines and the emotional strength required to share her truth with the world. The editor told her she had a rare gift, a voice that carried both pain and healing in the same breath, and as she listened, she felt her daughter's presence like a soft glow in the corner of the room, as if she was guiding her, pushing her forward, whispering, "Yes, you must tell our story, you must help the ones who cannot speak their own." When she stepped outside the building, the sky seemed brighter, the air lighter. She walked slowly, absorbing everything, letting the moment echo through her heart. She found herself walking toward the shelter, once more drawn to the place that had saved her, drawn to the women who mirrored her past and her strength. She entered the building, welcomed by familiar faces and warm smiles. The director greeted her with a quiet pride, telling her the mentoring program had already begun changing lives. She sat with the women in a circle again, their eyes reflecting tenderness and exhaustion and an unbreakable desire to keep going. She listened to their voices one by one, stories of hardship, stories of heartbreak, stories soaked with resilience. As she guided them through the session, she felt a quiet truth blooming inside her. She was meant to be here. She was meant to walk beside them. She was meant to turn her wounds into light for others to see by. After the session ended, a young woman approached her with trembling hands, eyes filled with unspoken fear. She said, "Your story is the only reason I am still here. Your strength reminded me I might have some left too." Maria felt her breath catch in her chest, and she gently took the young woman into her arms, holding her in a quiet embrace that spoke more than words could ever say. "This is why I survived," she thought, "so I could help another survive too." When she finally stepped outside the shelter, the sun was beginning to set, painting the world in shades of gold and soft rose. The evening air carried a gentle warmth, wrapping around her like a promise. She walked toward the park, once more drawn to the memory of her daughter, drawn to the truth that painful memories no longer owned her. They lived beside her with a gentleness she once believed impossible. She sat again on the bench beneath the tall oak tree, watching the sky shift slowly above her. As she sat, she felt something inside her settle, a deep, peaceful understanding. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes, piece by painful piece. She had found purpose in the ruins, found strength in the darkness, found light in the smallest corners. She had held grief until it softened. She had walked through sorrow until healing found her. She had endured the unbearable and somehow created a life filled with meaning, tenderness, and hope. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, listening to the soft sounds of the world around her. Children laughing, a dog barking, the wind rustling through the leaves, each sound a reminder that life still offered beauty and joy even after tragedy. She whispered softly into the air a message for her daughter, a message for the woman she had been, a message for the world. "I am still here, I am still rising." As she rose from the bench, the sky had deepened into twilight, stars shimmering faintly above her like quiet witnesses. She walked home, her steps steady, her heart open, her spirit strong. She unlocked her door, entered her warm little home, and stood in the quiet glow of the evening. She placed her notebook on the table, ready to begin shaping her story, ready to turn grief into guidance, ready to honor her journey on the page. She lit a small candle, its flame dancing softly in the stillness. She whispered a final vow to herself, a vow woven with courage and gentleness and unwavering strength. "Tomorrow I rise again, not from pain, but from purpose, not from loss, but from love." And she knew with a quiet certainty that her life from this moment forward would continue expanding, blooming, opening, leading her toward a future she once thought she would never reach, a future she had built with her own trembling, beautiful, unstoppable hands. The year passed like a slow unfolding sunrise, its light deepening gently across the landscape of her life. Each day she rose with more certainty, each night she rested with more peace. Her home grew warmer, her purpose grew clearer, and the shadows that once clung to her footsteps softened until they followed her like quiet reminders instead of unhealed wounds. She had not erased her past, she had learned to live beside it, she had learned to carry it with grace. Her book took shape slowly, page by page, truth by truth, memory by memory. She wrote not to reopen her pain, but to honor the strength that had carried her through it. She wrote for the women still trapped in darkness. She wrote for the mothers who had lost their worlds. She wrote for anyone who needed to know that rising was possible even after the worst storms. She shaped her story with tenderness and honesty, letting her heart guide the rhythm of every word. When the manuscript was finished, she held it in her hands with a quiet awe, as if she were holding a piece of her own spirit, something once shattered, now whole again. She delivered it to the publishing house, and the editor looked at her with eyes that glowed with respect, telling her this will change lives. She walked home that day with a calm joy blooming inside her, not loud, but steady, not fleeting, but deep. At the shelter, the mentoring group had grown into something beautiful, something powerful. Women arrived timid and fragile, and left slowly stronger, braver, ready to face the world with a renewed sense of who they were. She watched them transform, and in their transformation she saw pieces of her own journey reflected back to her. She offered guidance, she offered presence, she offered truth, but most of all she offered hope, the kind of hope that does not shout, but whispers, you can rise, you will rise. One evening near the end of summer, she received an invitation from a women's conference asking her to speak on healing, resilience, and rebuilding a life after loss. The message held her still for a long moment, her heart thrumming softly. She had once believed her voice was too small to matter, yet now it was being called to stand before hundreds to share the wisdom carved from her pain. She said yes, not from pride, but from purpose. The day of the conference arrived warm and bright. She stepped onto the stage with a slow breath, letting the room settle around her. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, eyes expectant, hearts open. She stood behind the microphone, her hands steady, her voice gentle, and she spoke. She spoke of loss, she spoke of brokenness, she spoke of nights too heavy to bear and mornings she thought she would never see. She spoke of grace, she spoke of hope, she spoke of rising again and again and again. The room fell silent, the kind of silence filled not with emptiness, but with presence, every person listening as if her words were water carried directly to the places inside them that had gone too long without healing. When she finished, the applause rose like a wave, not loud for the sake of noise, but deep for the sake of truth. Women approached her one after another, tears shining, voices trembling, telling her their stories, telling her she had given them strength, telling her she had helped them believe in their own survival. She listened, and she held their hands, and she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Months later, her book was released, the cover soft, the pages carrying her heart into the world. She held a copy gently, as if holding a child, each sentence carrying a piece of her past and a piece of her hope for the future. The response was overwhelming. Letters arrived from strangers across the world telling her how her story lifted them, how it saved them, how it soothed the darkness inside them. She read each one with gratitude, letting their words settle into her soul like small warm lanterns. One quiet autumn morning, she walked to the park, the air cool, the leaves turning shades of amber and gold, the world painting itself in colors that mirrored her own transformation. She sat beneath the oak tree, the same place where she once felt the sharp edge of grief. Now she felt only peace. She watched families walk by, children laughing, leaves falling softly around her. She closed her eyes and let the world breathe with her. She placed her hand over her heart and felt a steady, calm pulse. She whispered a soft message to the daughter she would always carry inside her. I am living, I am rising, I am becoming everything you would have wanted for me. And she felt a warmth settle over her like a quiet embrace from beyond, a reminder that love does not end, it shifts, it transforms, it follows us into every new chapter. As she stood to leave, a woman approached her holding a copy of her book. The woman's voice trembled as she said, "Your story saved my life. I was ready to give up, but your words kept me moving. I wanted to thank you in person." Maria felt her throat tighten, her eyes soften. She embraced the woman gently, feeling a deep connection, a soul-level understanding. She whispered, "You are stronger than you know, keep going," and the woman nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks before walking away with a newfound light in her steps. Maria watched her disappear among the trees, and she realized something profound. Her suffering had not been meaningless, her loss had not been a dead end, her story had become a bridge, a lantern, a lifeline. She was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had risen to create. She walked home slowly, the leaves crunching softly beneath her feet, the wind brushing across her skin like a blessing. When she reached her door, she paused, letting the moment settle, letting gratitude flood through her. She stepped inside her warm, quiet home, lit a candle, and placed her hand over her notebook, now filled with new dreams, new plans, new beginnings, and she whispered her lifelong vow once more, breathing it into the stillness, with a heart no longer heavy, but full. Tomorrow I rise again. And she knew without doubt that she would. Thank you for listening to this journey of a woman who lost everything yet found the courage to rebuild her life from the ashes. If her story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need a little light tonight. And if you are walking through your own darkness, remember this: you are not finished, you are not forgotten, and you are never beyond rising again. I will see you in the next story. Take care of your heart and keep moving forward.